Earth, the only planet in our solar system covered in water. Water was born 4.5 billion years ago, among the cloud of gas and dust that collapsed to form our solar system. Icy particles collided and stuck together, creating pebbles, then boulders, and eventually planets the size of Earth. Volcanic eruptions released this water into the air and, with help from icy comets and asteroids, created a freshwater ocean that turned the planet blue. Falling rain washed salt into the ocean, leaving freshwater mostly trapped in ice caps and glaciers. And as those glaciers receded, humans flooded into river valleys, built civilizations near water, and began to change it on a global scale. We've polluted it with toxins from industry and runoff from agriculture. We've taken more than our fair share by draining aquifers and entire seas. And we've disrupted the rains by dumping CO2 into the atmosphere. We can only live a few days without water, and only by changing our relationship to it can we hope to avoid the coming crisis.
From an Indigenous perspective, water is understood as being a living force and is being equated to life itself. So water isn't thought about as separate from people. It's more understood to be who we are and in relationship to us.
Deborah McGregor teaches at York University in Toronto and is Anishinaabe from the White River First Nation. She's devoted her career to researching water, its place in the environment, and environmental justice.
I just grew up right there by the water, and you kind of knew it so well. We had to, cut a hole in the ice to get the water. Like, pretty well we had to do this every day.
McGregor is an expert on how Canada's original inhabitants managed the land and how their knowledge can help reform a system that treats water like just another commodity.
I think even if people don't know very much about water, everyone still has a very intimate relationship with water. Everyone still needs water every day in some form to live.
All civilizations have needed access to clean water to survive. And we've always built those civilizations near water and spent centuries building systems to deliver water over hundreds of miles. For billions of years, water has been the lifeblood of the planet as it flowed from the oceans to the air and then down to Earth. But in just the geological blink of an eye, humans are fundamentally and irreversibly disrupting this natural cycle. And one impact is causing the most obvious damage.
Climate change exacerbates everything that's happening in relation to water. And we could see this actually playing out in the United States right now. You have one part of the country having major wildfires, and they would desperately like to have water. Meanwhile, opposite end of the country, they're dealing with major flood-like situations involving hurricane. So what you have is some places have way too much water, and other places who would desperately need the water aren't getting it.
This increasing imbalance is being felt around the world. In the last 4 decades, drought has devastated more people worldwide than any other natural disaster. Somalia is used to frequent droughts, but not ones that last as long as this one. It's been going on since 2015.
How does this experience compare to what happened with the drought in 2011?
abaartii hore macnaba ma lahayn tii hore waa la sheegaba ma ahayn oo macno leh laakiin tan maanta dhacday waxa loo bixiyay ma taqaan walaalle odaka weyn baa loo bixiyay waxa noqotay sima Soomaali oo dhan bay sintay.
Over 10 years of nearly continuous drought here has killed much of the livestock and driven nearly 50% of the country to the brink of famine.
haddayba ku jidhaaba say biyo jilacsan ma haystaan.
Climate change is also melting ice caps and glaciers, which is reducing the world's supply of fresh water. Melting snow and glaciers from the Andes and Himalayas provide water for drinking and for agriculture to 1/5 of humanity. And in North America, the receding snowpack in the eastern Sierras is affecting tens of millions of Californians. NASA estimates that 7 areas across the globe are losing nearly 300 billion tons of ice every year. Dwindling access to water is triggering migrations in many countries.
When people don't have access to water because there actually isn't any, because they're dealing with drought-like conditions, people will have to move. They're basically climate change refugees.
In Central America's Golden Triangle, crop yields are dropping. Audilio Mejia and his family have been farming these lands for decades. Now, he's dealing with crippling droughts year after year.
Para nosotros es una amenaza, pues, el clima como ha estado. Cuando más necesitaban agua era cuando no la tuvieron, entonces eso, pues por eso fue que los bajó el rendimiento de esta cosecha. A veces uno cuando mira ejemplos de otros amigos o de otros vecinos, de otras personas que uno conoce, pues a uno le dan ganas de emigrar, pero sí se le hace, a uno de campesinos se le hace difícil, pues peor si no tiene quien lo oriente.
But while it's easy to blame climate change for the global water crisis, there's a far more powerful force at work. Farming uses 70% of all available fresh water on the planet, and it's a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions, second only to energy production. Industrial agriculture sucks up huge amounts of water in places like Colorado. It drains rivers and streams to irrigate corn, to feed cattle in massive feedlots. The water use is astounding. It takes 2,500 gallons of water to produce 1 bushel of corn, and each head of cattle eats 50 bushels of corn over its lifetime. That adds up to 125,000 gallons of water for every animal. And because these farms get water for free, the cost to the planet for cheap meat is rapidly disappearing groundwater. This has far-reaching impacts on farmers and our entire food system. California's San Joaquin Valley is one of the most fertile places on the planet. And it, too, is running out of water. Farmers are being forced to dig deeper and deeper in order to find less and less groundwater.
We're the breadbasket of the United States. 50% of your fruits, nuts, vegetables come from the San Joaquin Valley, or California in general, California agriculture. So,
Tony Azevedo is a third-generation farmer in the San Joaquin Valley. He grows tomatoes, pistachios, and other crops on 8,000 acres of farmland.
for years we didn't use the wells at all, the groundwater. We always had surface water to farm with. The problem now is that we are in a drought, so we're relying on groundwater to do all of our irrigating.
What's the process of planning ahead for what could happen?
Well, now the last 5 years we've been pumping a lot of groundwater to keep this ranch going. And eventually you're gonna run out. We have 85 employees, that some of them are third generation, counting on us to stay solvent. So that's always in the back of my mind, how long we can go here.
What's the plan if this continues and there's no rain, no runoff?
I guess we're done.
Disappearing groundwater isn't just a problem in the United States. This NASA satellite map shows just how bad things have gotten. The red you see on the map shows the places where groundwater is being steadily depleted. As early as 2025, experts say that half the world's population will be living in places where there isn't enough water. And it's estimated that by 2040, most of the world won't have enough water to keep up with demand all year long. And when wells run dry, existing tensions flare up. In Basra, Iraq, severe water shortages helped spark anti-government protests. The danger posed by our looming water crisis is listed by the World Economic Forum as among the top 10 global risks to humanity, just below weapons of mass destruction, but above natural disasters like volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. Yet the main cause of the water crisis isn't just climate change. It's rooted in our relationship to water.
So when water becomes a resource, and then it then has to be managed as a natural resource. So then laws are created, authority and jurisdiction is given to what can happen to water, and then who can have access to it. It could be allocated to forestry operations, it could be allocated to agriculture. So people will then compete because it creates that kind of capitalist competition scenario.
Who wins and who loses in that competition has direct consequences not just for people, but also for ecosystems. When the state of Georgia allows the city of Atlanta and South Georgia farmers to pull hundreds of millions of gallons of water a day from the Chattahoochee River in the middle of a drought, it actually affects the oysters in Florida.
I watch you kind of working at the bottom.
Hurting oystermen like Abraham Hartsfield and his son Shannon.
We never had sea urchins in our oyster bars before.
This fresh water comes, it pushes all these predators away. And right now, the salinity has changed drastically.
Less freshwater in Apalachicola Bay means more predators, and that means fewer oysters for the Hartsfields to harvest. Because of decisions being made in Georgia, Shannon Hartsfield says oystering is nothing like it's been in the past.
You called and throw them into the bottom of the boat, and it would pile up.
So many species are disappearing, and we need them for ecosystem health. And you need to have ecosystem health in order for people to be healthy.
Even though we wouldn't survive more than a few days without water, it wasn't until 2010 that the UN passed a resolution recognizing that access to it is a human right. And even when they do have access to it, poor water quality means that access can be deadly. Nearly 3.5 million people, mostly children, die every year from waterborne disease. 2 billion people don't have access to clean, safe water. In India, the Ganges River is sacred to the nation's 1 billion Hindu. But it's also one of the world's most polluted waterways. The Ganges is the main source of water for more than 500 million people, but it's contaminated with viruses and bacteria that cause life-threatening diseases like cholera, typhoid, and viral diarrhea.
Today, Ganga is more polluted than it was 30 years ago. I have seen the situation worsening only. No improvement at all.
1.6 billion gallons of raw sewage and industrial waste pour into the Ganges every day.
How much sewage is coming out there right now?
150 million liters per day.
Why aren't there processing centers or water treatment facilities or infrastructure basically to...
This is the inability and inefficiency of the government.
Even though you could be living right beside a river, you can't drink the water there. And that's because of contamination of it through industrial development. So it's an inequitable burden placed on the people downstream who then have to live with the contaminated water.
In the city of Kanpur, for example, hundreds of tanneries release toxic chemicals and heavy metals into the water. Those who contribute least to the pollution are the ones who suffer the most.
Water's responsibility as an entity or having agency is to support life. And we interfere with that by polluting it, by damming it, stopping it from flowing and doing what it should be doing. So we interfere with water doing its job, basically. And we don't have the right to do that. And every time we do that, that's an injustice. Industrial contamination, like basically release of chemicals and contaminants into fresh water, has had devastating impacts on the natural world because of the impact on aquatic life.
These impacts on plants and animals trickle down and can affect humans as well, sometimes for generations. Some heavy metals can stay in the sediment of rivers and lakes for hundreds of years. Lake Onondaga in northern New York State was once called the most polluted lake in America. Decades of industrial pollution turned the lake into a toxic waste site. Even though the pollution stopped decades ago, children and women of childbearing age can't eat the fish in the lake because of high levels of mercury. The company that's responsible for dealing with the pollution says the lake has been cleaned up. But the Onondaga Nation, the traditional stewards of the lake, disagree.
We've cleaned up the lake, we've done the dredging and capping, we're doing the habitat restoration, which is turning out wonderfully.
Honeywell, which bought out one of the original polluters, and taxpayers have spent around $1 billion to clean up the bottom of the lake, and the company is still restoring other sites around the shore. Sid Hill, a member of the Onondaga Nation, says Honeywell and New York State need to be doing more.
What's your biggest critique when it comes to the way this whole remediation project has been going with the lake?
It's just the idea of not disclosing everything and having this propaganda issue that it's clean. You know, it's a clean lake. Oh, we cleaned the lake. It's still a Superfund site. You know, there's still toxins in there. I don't see the next generation ever seeing a clean lake.
The legacy of industrial contamination isn't just confined to Onondaga Lake.
So I also grew up that if you were a woman that of childbearing age, you shouldn't be eating a certain number of fish from the Great Lakes because they were contaminated. You know, people have this relationship with water, but that relationship is starting to be disrupted through contamination of water.
For Jeannie and Sid, the larger issue is the system that led to the contamination in the first place.
Who do you blame for the pollution?
Whoever runs those multinational corporations that trample over and harm the environment, whatever else is ever in their way for their profits. I think about that a lot. What was anybody thinking of when they were just free dumping into the water, just dumping.
When no one takes responsibility for the health of the planet's water, it's easy to pollute. But trying to own it can be just as disastrous.
Water is thought of as being a commodity, something to be bought and sold. Water can also be property. So water is also understood to be private property. So you have unequal access, and as a result, people suffer. So having access to fresh water is really important in order to just live.
In Flint, Michigan, the government treated water like just another cost to be cut. It switched the city's supply to the Flint River, but failed to prevent lead from leaching into the water. Caitlin Tobin's son drank the water.
I barely let him take a bath in the water. I buy bottled water and try washing him down as much as I can, and then he was getting bumps all over. They said because of the lead in his blood, he couldn't get rid of it. They knew a long time ago that they were poisoning people from it. They could care less. So.
Lead is toxic in even the smallest amounts and can cause irreversible brain damage and even death in children. And parents here worry about their kids' future.
This water is from my tap. This right here shows it. They're saying this is safe for us. This is what happens when profit takes precedence over people, and we're just here to stand as one to say that we won't stand for this.
When do we want clean water? When do we want it now? If we don't get it, shut it down.
At the core of our global water crisis is how we manage and allocate water. Experts say that if our depletion, pollution, and misuse of fresh water continues unchecked, it could affect not only our entire food system, but also push ecosystems and societies to a point of no return. Experts say one solution to the looming water crisis is a radical shift in how we choose to see and value water. Not as a resource or a commodity, but rather as a life-sustaining force, essential for human and planetary health, and an entity in its own right.
In the Anishinaabe concept, we think about water as being part of 4 elements that make up the planet, and water is always in relation to these other elements. To me, that's one of the primary things that people can learn from Indigenous peoples is that you need to have this relationship with the natural world.
When you're outside or near water, in the presence of water, to me it conveys a sense of respect. It's a sense of awe that despite everything, water is still flowing. Water's still trying to do what it's supposed to be doing despite everything that you throw at it. It's just such an awesome power.
In this new era, humans are responsible for the greatest impacts on the planet's water. But McGregor believes we still have the power to change the course we're on.
People are the ones who have the power and the will and the intelligence to mess up. We're so intelligent that we can be so beautiful and innovative and creative, but we can also be so destructive. So there's that side of us. So we've been destructive collectively as humanity, some way more so than others, and we have to then use our intelligence and our will and our power to solve this huge thing that we've created. So we're the ones who actually have to change.